Broadcasting live from home of the intern, the Vintern, Cultura Media House, and brought to you by 786 Sports. It's El Big League Show. In today's lineup, Adrian Lorenzo. And now batting, Danny Enriquez.
Oh, that's me. That's my cue. Welcome to a Big League Show. This is Danny Enriquez. I'm here with Adrian Lorenzo. Yeah, we're obviously in mid-season form right here on El Big League Show. Appreciate you guys joining us live here in Casa Cultura. So like I said, I am joined, as always, by former MLB exec, two-time world champion, father. Shout out to your daughter on her birthday. She is looking beautiful, and can't think of anything to do right now than talk some hardball with the one and only Adrian Lorenzo. Adrian, how you doing?
What's up, D-Money? Thank you for that intro, as always. And thank you to Junior for that wonderful intro, as always. Yeah, man, it was pretty cool. Celebrate my the first birthday for my first child. So it's a unique time in my life. And but glad to be jumping right back into our Big League Show after a 1 week Memorial Day break. So hyped, man. Let's get into it.
Yeah, take 1 week break. Can't get the intro right. You know, it's a game of timing.
Shaking off the rust.
It's a game of timing. We're back though, and I'll tell you who hasn't left. Philadelphia Phillies, right there in the thick of it of the NL East, as always. One of the most exciting teams, kind of this era. Really, I think it's fair to say. You know, you look back on different time periods and say there's a team that you just say the name of the club. You know the players. You know the look. You know the moments. You kind of know the vibe. Feels like the Phillies are one of those teams where if I say, hey, down the road, you know, the 2020 Philadelphia Phillies, people are going to know what I'm talking about, what it looks like, some of those big moments. So how do we get here to the point that the Philadelphia Phillies always kind of hung around, had their moments, certainly with obviously they were the marquee franchise for a minute there in the 2000s, but how do they get to this point where they got an identifiable group of core players that are so much fun to watch and so effective?
I think, first of all, it helps to be one of the marquee franchises since the beginning of the sport. You know, like that always, it just helps to have that history. They have that attachment, that nostalgia that goes back 100+ years. And so obviously Philadelphia being one of the premier cities or the original cities in the United States of America, that history is tied and connected. But I think it has to start with their ownership group, just treating it like a public trust. I feel like the Phillies have always been invested in across the board: facilities, stadiums, payroll, development. They go after star players. They retain their own star players. They participate in free agency. They make big trades right now. But I think they really established themselves back in the Ruben Amaro days, when Ruben Amaro was GM, back in that 2007 to 2010 run that they had, where they were the team in the National League East. I think I was going to school in Philadelphia then, and I actually got to be there the night that on the game where they won the World Series, and walked all the way from Citizens Bank, from the bank to Center City. And to this day, it's still the craziest celebration I can imagine being a part of. And I've been a part of some Marlins ones here, but Philadelphia goes to a whole other level. When you're good, when the Phillies are good, it's one of the premier places for a player to play. And I think anybody will tell you that. I was still working with the Marlins, and we went to the postseason in 2023 recently, and we played the Phillies in the first round, and we got walloped by the Phillies. There was a big talent gap there. But the electricity level in that stadium can get to, I don't know. I've been at Fenway. I've been at Yankee Stadium for big games, and Citizens Bank gets as electric, if not more so, than any other stadium in baseball when things are rocking. So I think that helps. It helps to start from that starting point as an organization. And I think they're just doing a lot of really, really good things right now. They got things clicking pretty good right now.
You know, I remember when this team just started picking up steam, and it's like the fan base gravitated towards this particular group of players, not just because they were good, but because of just their energy level, the way they kind of got down, and it started turning into a thing. Obviously, you were with the Red Sox when they had a clearly identifiable group of stars, kind of feel to the team, and you could tell. I mean, think about the 2013, the connection between city and team at that point for a million reasons. Is there something to that when there's just a connection between the city and the team beyond just, hey, these guys are a great team and we got pretty nice fan base, and there's some sort of magic element there that goes beyond the baseball stuff that we always talk about?
I mean, without question, I think any player that's played in those environments, I mean, just going to a game, you feel it as a fan, as a visitor, as opposing executive, but as a player, when you're in that, we just had Raul Ibanez in here not too long ago, and he had some really good years with the Phillies, and he's talking about how there's something different about playing when that whole, because it's not just the city. It's important to remember that they represent this whole mid-Atlantic Philadelphia region, South Jersey, Philadelphia, greater Pennsylvania. They represent that whole region, and that's a baseball part of town. It's, Eagles dominate there too, Eagles Giants part of town, but I think it's for baseball purposes, I think the Phillies, especially when they're going good, they're king, and I think it adds an element of wanting to play there, wanting to play under those circumstances, atmospheres. And I think players go there, like they have a good free agency pitch. Like they have a reputation as a place you want to go play because of exactly this. I've heard it from countless guys. Bryce Harper lands there, Kyle Schwarber lands there, Nick Castellanos lands there. All these guys land there via free agency. So that's them choosing to be there. And it's a couple of things happening at the same time, right? It's like the players wanting to be there and the dollars being appropriate to also like warrant them wanting to be there. It's not like the city and the electricity is carrying them. They're also investing at some of the highest levels in all of baseball. So I think that there's no way that doesn't help.
Cuban Oracle in the chat talking about, Cliff Lee at the end of his career with the Phillies and some of, just some of the big names that they've had pass through there. Obviously the big name behind it all, someone you know very well, we know very well here in Miami, but obviously you worked with him over there in the Red Sox, which is Dave Dombrowski. So his ability to gather these big names and not just spend. It was very strategic. He got it done. How is he so effective at kind of recreating the formula or finding the formula at the various stops that he's been at?
I mean, we can have a whole episode on just that. I think Dave Dombrowski's headed right to a first ballot Hall of Fame, up there with like the likes of John Sherholtz with those Braves teams back then. I think he's this era's John Sherholtz, or this era's, and not just this era. This has spanned probably 30 years now where he's been a general manager or a lead baseball executive for this. If you think about it, like him, Brian Cashman, they're the few guys that have stood around, like have stuck in those positions with different clubs for this amount of time. And he's now done this at multiple stops where I think people forget he built the Expos before the Expos. Like there was a time where the Expos were the best team in baseball, best young system in baseball, before him going and starting the expansion franchise of the Miami Marlins from 91, 93, all the way through that 97 championship. And after that, he was the architect of those teams. Would then go on to rebuild and reestablish the Tigers, who were losing 100 plus games per season, and then got into that whole phase. While they never won, they were one of the better teams in the AL for a good stretch there. Those Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, Prince Fielder, Max Scherzer, Porcello, Verlander, those Tigers era teams were constructed by him. And then he would go on. My overlap with him would come, I believe, in the 2015 season. He comes in midway through and becomes the president of baseball ops with the Boston Red Sox. And I was in a major league staff assistant role, replay tech role when he comes in. And at that point in time, the Red Sox were a really good organization. We weren't having a good major league season, but the system was among the best top 3 systems in baseball. Had a young Jackie Bradley, young Mookie Betts, young Blake Swihart, a bunch of young guys coming up. And we had built that farm system up. But I remember Dave Dombrowski coming in and kind of focusing everybody on the fact that this thing happens at the major league level. The most important thing that a major league team does is win at the major league level or play at the major. Everything you do is to win at the big league level. And sometimes you can lose focus of that and trying to build out your system and trying to build out your processes. And I remember he came in and like there was this kind of jarred everybody back into the fact that, hey, let's not forget that this is the most important thing, which is winning at the big league level. And immediately came in and traded for Chris Sale in some deals that they hurt. Yohan Moncada was going outward. Michael Kopech was going outward in that deal. So there were these deals that they hurt, but fast forward a couple of years and we win in 2018, you win the World Series with a loaded roster. And so what I think he does really well is he's got this span of experience and this ability to operate the major league club. He's one of those GMs that he travels with the club everywhere. He's with that major league team at every step of the way. And he's not a micromanager in terms of like the minor league side, but in terms anything related to the major league club and the major league manager, major league personnel, he felt like he was like right there, right in lockstep at every turn. And I think that he's transferred that over to the Phillies, but in a modernized version. I think he's not a traditional old school GM, although he has those. There's some wheel and deal, more Wild West shooting from the hip style deal making, especially at the deadline. But I think in this Phillies iteration, it's a modernized, evolved version of that. So he's benefiting from this long arc of experience to then now leverage that in one of the premier franchises. And I think this team is pretty complete. It's a pretty rounded, like they have a good system. They have good young players, but they're also laden with free agent signings, good trades. Like Luzardo is looking like an incredible trade for them right now. He's pitching like an ace, all while not having to give up either Mick Abel or Andrew Painter to get him. And so I just think they got a really good balance of things going.
Before we get into the Luzardo trade,
yep,
it all fits in with what I'm about to ask you about. We talk about amateur scouting. We talk about international scouting. We talk about pro scouting. You think about, minor leaguers, right? Maybe fringe major leaguers and picking the right guys. It seems when it comes to star player acquisitions, guys that everybody knows, no secret about who a Bryce Harper is, a Trey Turner, a JT Realmuto. Seems he gets the right ones that fit together and make a huge impact. Luzardo being a more recent example. What's that skill? And just talk about that part of the game where it's look, I could say trade for Bryce Harper or trade for all these guys, but it seems like first of all, it doesn't always work, as we know from the Marlins. We saw it in 2012 when they tried to just get some big names that didn't work. What's that skill to be able to land the right star players and go all in on the right guys as opposed to just going for a splash?
Skill, art, science. It's kind of like it's comprehensive, right? And there's not a straightforward answer, but that's where I think he leans on this like wealth of experience of kind of seeing it all, doing it all, and seeing every iteration of what makes a major league team successful. And it's important to note that major league teams, like, you don't win on paper. You can set a lineup in spring training 1 through 9 that looks great, but understanding that the actual way that 162 and 180 plus plays out when you get into the postseason comes with all sorts of ups, downs. Like that roster changes so much from spring training to the last game of the World Series and any team that makes it all the way. And I think that there's just a deep understanding and a no panic and a sense of having been there before that definitely helps. I think we had Mike Lowell in here talking about his experience with Dave Dombrowski back in the Marlins days. And that when, I think this was he was saying it was like in 95 or 96, whenever Mike Lowell was traded for, he told him what was going to happen with that core of players of Luis Castillo, Alex Gonzalez, Derek Lee. And he told Mike Lowell, communicated it to him very directly in a way that was palatable to the player, but also in a way that I think is underrated. I think we're seeing it now in this age of maybe more analytically driven GMs that are more insulated from direct contact with the player. I don't think Dave Dombrowski is that. I think he's a direct to the player, direct to the staff, direct to the manager throwback in a way. And I think that direct relationship allows you to always have your finger on the pulse of what's necessary. That plus the range of experience allows you to have a better feel for what's necessary via free agency, what's necessary via trade. And also, like, I think people think only trade and free agency is the way to build your roster. No, you need to know when to call up your prospects. When you have a prospect that's carrying value that perhaps doesn't fit with your roster, maybe that's the one that you include in a trade going outward. I'm sure that's how they felt about Starlin Caba, to include him in a deal for Jesus Luzardo, right? Far away. They have a win now team. It's a far away prospect. While he's an interesting prospect, I think Phillies fans would make that trade all day, especially given how it's turned out. It's turned out well, but I think that you need to understand where you are in your cycle, right? And they're in a win now mode because you have all this money allocated to this major league roster. So and then there's the ability to like actually wheel and deal at the deadline. That's a whole other skill that I think is highly underrated, because that's so comprehensive. That's needing to know ownership on the other side. It's needing to know the other general managers. It's needing to like have relationships with agents. It's also, I don't want to sit here, and I don't think Dave would sit here and say, oh, I do this all. It's you need to know how to play the orchestra that is your baseball operations department, your pro scouting, your amateur scouting, your player development. You need to be throttling and polling all these different things, but make no mistake, when he walks into that room, he's the lead decision maker, right? So hats off to that guy, because he's one of the premier executives in the game, and I love talking about this kind of stuff, and it's good to see him having some success.
Well, listen, one guy who's had a lot of success until really lately with that start, giving up 12 earned runs in 3 innings. But overall, this guy's been a Cy Young type pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies. That is Jesus Luzardo. You look at the baseball savant, that breaking ball, 96th percentile. Fastball, more velocity than effectiveness, but still, 96 on average coming from the left side. Not a lot of hard contact, a lot of Ks, limiting his walks, a lot of whiffs. Some of the same stuff you saw with the Marlins, but just the consistency and, quite frankly, the health. Don't want to jinx it, but he's been healthy. Number one, let's just talk about the Luzardo trade. You saw Luzardo when he was acquired on the Marlins side. To make a trade like this for a player who's had injury concerns, and has had periods of ineffectiveness, but had the upside. What goes into that kind of decision?
So many things. I think Jesus Luzardo is an example of a once premier prospect when he was with the Oakland A's, and then had, for whatever reason, a kind of like a downtick in performance at the AAA level. I think he had already broken through to the big leagues, but got sent back down. And just like that downtick in performance, and it provided the opening for him to be accessible for Starling Marte at that time, which was probably one of the more popular players at the trade deadline when that trade was made. So sometimes it's not that the team doesn't value the player. It's just they're down on him just enough. He'd faltered just enough to open it up to be acquired. And then he comes in and worked. I thought he worked really well with Mel Stoudemire with the Marlins during his time. I thought they made some real strides with Jesus Luzardo. And it was a tough one to watch the Marlins like have to give that away, because you traded for a player that would then kind of take the step forward as a Marlin, which he did, showed real flashes of real dominance, to then be moved in a deal for an A-ball prospect. That's a hard pill for the Marlins fans to swallow. But I think the Phillies properly identified that this is a player on the upswing and that maybe hasn't reached full potential yet, and had enough of system depth to not deal from, like I said, Mick Abel, Andrew Painter at the top of their system to be able to complete this deal. And they do, and he kind of immediately becomes your ace in a rotation that already, I don't know if anybody's ever an ace when you have Zach Wheeler in your rotation. I think that guy might always be the ace. I love Zach Wheeler, but to give this like left-handed complement to that rotation, Jesus Luzardo's a beast, man. That guy, he's one of my favorite pitchers in baseball, if not one of my favorite, not my favorite left-handed pitcher in baseball. And I think we haven't seen the best version of Jesus Luzardo yet. And while there's been some health hiccups, I think he's been better than even advertised this year, sans this last start where he got touched up a little bit, which every starter does at some point in the year. But I think he's going to be a major part of their postseason run this year. I think they're going to be squarely in the thick of it. And I think that they're one of my favorites to kind of win it all this year. especially when you add pieces like Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, he was with you guys last time you were in the playoffs against
Correct.
the Phillies. I'm sure he was thinking, man, I wish I had some of these guys on my side.
But
one of those guys. Go ahead.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think what doesn't get talked about often enough is how valuable those experiences are. Like Luzardo pitching in 2023 at Citizens Bank against that electric crowd. You know, I think that those kinds of experience, while it didn't go well for him in that moment, I think the next time he's in those moments, I think it will go well for him, because he's had that experience and he has pitched in those high leverage games. So these things all end up being connected. And I wouldn't be surprised if all those times that the Phillies watched Luzardo pitch against them is part of the reason they were so aggressively wanted to acquire him now. And I think it's good on Jesus. And he's developed this new sweeper that's been a dominant pitch for him. So saw some tweet or some stat that he was up there in some comparison with Randy Johnson in terms of pitchers. Like, I got to pull up the tweet at some point, but kind of this amount of strikeouts and this many innings to start the season hasn't been seen since Randy Johnson. And that's anytime you're in that category, you're in good company.
A guy who was already in a high category now has leapt into a new category at the age of 32, right in his prime. Kyle Schwarber, man, you look at the baseball savant for this dude, and it is so much red. Aside from whiff, which, look, he's a slugger, that's going to happen, and clearly the base running value is not going to be at the highest level, but pretty much anything associated with a bat, he is in the deep red. 99 batting run value, 99 xWOBA, the exit velocity, the barrel, hard hit at the top of the scale, bat speed. He's not chasing. It seems like it's all coming together. He was already very patient, obviously very powerful, but now the hitting component is as good as it's ever been.
Yeah. And I love talking about Kyle Schwarber, because he's one of the ultimate examples of how batting average is just an incomplete way to look at a player. You look at Kyle Schwarber right now hitting 266, and it wouldn't, if I only told you 266, what would you think about him as a player? Probably a below average player, right? You wouldn't see that as an above, but it just shows you, like, you have to look deeper than that. You can't just look at batting average. And I think people get batting average is such a polarizing item to talk about, because we're so ingrained into thinking that that's the way to evaluate good or bad. The hitter's got a good average, he's a good hitter. If he has a bad average, he's a bad hitter. And it's way more complex than that, especially in Schwarber's case here. I mean, you got on base through the roof, swing decisions, pitch selection through the roof. And you got obviously top of the scale left-handed power. But I love talking about this, because he usually gets mentioned as the, like, oh, well, he hits 240, 250, but he has 40 home runs and a bunch of strikeouts. But yeah, but he's on base at an enormous clip. And tell me this isn't valuable right in the middle of that Phillies lineup, right? It changes the whole outlook of their lineup by him being in it. So I think it just shows you have to look well beyond that in terms of batting average, indicating if a player is good or not. I think the on base is a major component of Kyle Schwarber's game. I think he's got to be up there in the 98th percentile,
about 400,
98th percentile in walk rate. But we talk about this all the time, Danny, in terms of how you need to make good swing decisions to leverage your power. And I think he's making elite level swing decisions to access that power. He's almost got 20 home runs, and we just got into June. So he's on pace for probably a 40 homer season, and getting on base at a 400 rate. This is an extremely valuable player, and a player that chose Philadelphia over a lot of other suitors in free agency. So connecting it back to the Phillies and Dave Dombrowski and the pitch that they made, because he was sought after, right? He was sought after as a marquee free agent and got paid as one. And you have to be able to make a good pitch to get that guy to come. And shout out to the Phillies for doing so.
Listen, shout out to the chat. It is on fire. Got 305G on saying Dave Dombrowski has to be considered the best to ever do it. Mentioning that, with respect to Luzardo, this is a guy that wanted to stay in Miami. Local kid, should have been a piece they built around. Disappointed as a Fish fan. It's hard to see him doing what he's doing for the Philadelphia Phillies. Robert Perez talking more about Dombrowski. You had Lowell in 1999. You had Cabrera as an international signee, and you had Beckett as the second pick of the draft. So what is it? I mean, you're talking about, I guess, pro scouting with Lowell, right? Because he was with the Yankees. International with Cabrera, and then amateur with Beckett straight out of high school. So triple threat right there, set up a championship.
Yeah, I mean, and those are just Marlins examples. If you open the Expos one gets really fascinating. I'm not going to remember the exact details, but the players that have passed through the Expos organization, Pedro Martinez, Randy Johnson, Larry Walker, Vladimir Guerrero, like that. So it stems even further than that, and the White Sox even before that. So it's hard for me to counter that there's 2-3 better or more experienced or more with more accolades as a lead baseball executive than Dave Dombrowski.
I will say the one thing about Schwarber, yes, he's had the high on base, the high slug with the lower batting average. But this year, as you've seen that batting, 266 for him, I believe would be a career high, right? He had 291 for the, his brief period with the Red Sox. But as far as like a whole season, I believe 266 would be at or above his career highs, a career 232 hitter. So he is hitting it more on top of still doing all the other things that made him great with the big impact, the patience, and everything else. So when you do, even he's not hitting 320, when you're a 230 career hitter and have the value that Schwarber has had in his career, and then you bump that up to 260, it's like he's in a whole nother level. I know batting average, not everything, but it doesn't mean that you have to be a 230 hitter while you're doing all this other stuff. There was still room to grow, and at 32, it seems like he's doing that.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I'm not saying batting average is not indicative of anything.
Right.
It's still saying that these hits are falling. You are hitting the ball and they're converted into non-outs, which is the biggest thing. Like, not making outs is probably the most valuable thing. Any analyst would tell you that. Just don't make outs, and that's, you either get a hit, you walk, you hit by pitch, or you make some productive outs. But avoiding outs altogether. So I'm not poo-pooing batting average. I'm just trying to show that it doesn't paint the whole picture. So when he's hitting 230, hits are falling at a 23%. All of a sudden they fall at 26%. A few more hits fall in. Now the production goes up, right? So I think he's making elite level swing decisions, and that's why he's just hitting the ball hard at good angles at a high enough clip where they're falling in for hits as well. But that's not coming at the expense of the extra base hit. The slug is through the roof. The walks are through the roof. And when you create traffic in front of Harper, Castellanos, Ramuto, you're like, those turn into runs a lot. Playing against Kyle Schwarber with the Nationals, playing against him with the Phillies, it's just a nightmare he can be pitched to. There are some holes in the swing and some swing and miss there. But he will not chase you out of the zone. If you try to live out of the zone, he's ball 4 and you have traffic and you have good guys hitting behind him, and that's how runs get scored. So I see directly how he contributes to a winning lineup for sure. And from everything that I've heard and gathered, like an elite off the field or in the clubhouse type of presence in the, that winning type of player, in my opinion.
Talk about painting a picture, someone who's painting a nice picture in the minors, Andrew Painter, right? So he's got 8 starts, not a huge body of work so far, AAA and A ball level, but 3.18 ERA, 28 innings, got 32 Ks against just 8 walks. So he's somebody who I know Phillies fans are waiting. I think July All-Star break maybe is when you might see an Andrew Painter join the rotation. But someone who's already joined the rotation, someone you're familiar with from the draft process, Mick Abel had a nice start, starting to get going. Went down, I believe, went back up. So maybe this is now the time where we will see Mick Abel be a fixture of this rotation into the playoffs and beyond. So those two guys, what could they potentially do to elevate this rotation to a whole nother level?
It's really to have a good first place or contending for first place major league club, and then to have 2 premier prospect arms knocking on the door of the big leagues. Abel already breaking through, and Painter kind of knocking on the door as well. That's an optimal scenario that you'd want to be in as a major league franchise, right? Like, you have a high functioning major league roster, but then you have 2 elite level pitching prospects kind of ready to supplement those rosters, because like we've mentioned, you can have 5 starters written in spring training. You're going to need 11, 12 over the course of a year. So when that can come from within and be impactful from within at a high level, that's where I think the Phillies are healthy beyond just a major league team. They have good amateur scouting processes going. They have good player development processes going. I mean, Mick Abel, I remember clearly from that draft time, because that was the same draft as Max Meyer, Asa Lacy. I believe that was the 2020 draft, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll never forget this. Scott Aldred, who was the pitching coordinator at the time with the Marlins, we're in our pre-draft meetings, and the discussion was really between Asa Lacy, big 6'5" left-handed starter out of Texas A&M, and Max Meyer, who was more of a 6-foot right-handed elite slider profile. And because we wanted to win in a shorter amount of time, we were focused more on the college. See, there were 2 seasoned high-level college arms. So those were the 2 that we were locked in on. But I remember when the conversation came around to Scott, who was our pitching coordinator at the time, we asked him, hey, who do you got, Asa Lacy or Max Meyer? And he looked at us and he said, Mick Abel, who was also in, he was just a high school kid in consideration. But that was the level of upside that he showed out of high school. That was more of a risky play at that pick where we selected Meyer. But I just, that sticks in my mind as, shout out Scott, because I think he saw it and it's played out pretty good to this point. But to have, it's electric stuff, and it just looks right, man. It just, like, you pull it up and it's a quick, clean arm from a big physical frame. It just all works right. You and I talk about things look right or they don't sometimes. This looks right.
Before we get off Philly, so we're talking about 2 young pitchers who either are just debuting or on the verge of their debut here in the major league level. You're Philadelphia, you're trying to win a championship. Assume that continues on its current trajectory, and they're going to be in the mix around the All-Star break, around the trade deadline, to get into the playoff picture in a major way. Do you look at these guys like, hey, these are power arms that don't know any better, and they could really give us a boost in the playoffs and lead us to a championship? We've seen it happen before. Or do you say these are pieces that could probably bring us a huge haul of whatever we need elsewhere, veterans that are going to get us to that championship level? Knowing, we just talked about Dave Dombrowski, how he's going to make moves. He has got feel for the major league level. How do you see that playing out with 2 guys who may or may not be difference makers in the playoffs this year?
I think we got to see how close we are in July as the deadline's coming through. If you have any injuries between now and then, they just had Alvarado go down with a suspension. So like a high leverage reliever, like those are really valuable at the trade deadline. And in July, August, dog days of September. So I think it's still too early to answer that question. But this is the ultimate fight between player development and major league operations. Like, do you give up the high upside guy for a short window acquisition? But sometimes, like, again, it's about winning championships at the big league level. So if you feel you lock in with a player that you want in a trade scenario, and you don't have enough beyond after, let's say, Abel and Painter in your system, it falls off, and you don't have enough in that system to recuperate value, and the other side is locked in on one of those 2 guys, then you have a decision to make, and that's where how ready are they to contribute right now factors in. So if Abel's ready to contribute now, then maybe you don't pull that trigger. Maybe you don't make that move to move him, but maybe you do. And I think there's a risk tolerance here. Like, would you rather win it now, or would you rather hold on to the future, so to speak? But I think Philly's is one of those organizations that always needs to be in it now. So it's tricky. There's not a straightforward answer to that question. It's not. History says that Dave Dombrowski will go for it if it's there. And I think the Philadelphia market dictates that you should operate that way to an extent. But where's that line of not foolishness, but where you're giving up? It's like what you're giving up is too good, and it'll hurt you 2-3 years down the road. And that's tricky, and I don't think we'll see that until closer to July.
Yeah, I think from Marlins' perspective, I'm always looking at things, because that's my team. But both championships, you had Livan Hernandez as a rookie, who really was instrumental in that championship.
Yep.
Dontrelle Willis in 2003, not as much in the playoffs, more of a reliever, but clearly was the spark plug that got you to where you were. In that case, winning a wild card after starting from a low point. So there's no rule says these guys can't help you this year if it all pans out, but that's the unknown, right? So that'll be interesting to see. Got a lot of comments here before we move on to the next topic. Robert Perez, fellow Marlins fan, he's talking about basically just, and this is a whole episode about how teams like the Marlins should operate with the small market budget. But, just in terms of the balance, and again, we'll get into this, Robert. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're gonna go deep on the Marlins here in the future, but just in general, what are some of the things you believe, this broadly, when you're, let's say, a bottom third market, some things that you believe, hey, this is something that, given your restraints, you should always be focused on, prioritize, allocate resources to?
I might not be the right person to ask because I'm always wanting to win now. Because I think that there's always moves that you can make to be a competitive team now, to be knocking on the door of the playoffs. Now, sometimes you get into the playoffs and you realize that the other teams in the playoffs, that there's a massive gap between you and them. And that's a bit of a reality check. So like 2023 with the Marlins is a perfect example. You get into the postseason, you sneak in, you play the Phillies, you match up with them in the series, and you're like, okay, they are significantly better than we are. But you can always catch fire in a series. If the Marlins have Sandy Alcantara healthy, if Yuri Perez isn't shut down earlier in the season, now you have Sandy, Yuri, Luzardo,
right,
to match up against the Phillies. And like the Phillies wouldn't have been comfortable with those matchups necessarily. I don't know if they still win the series anyway, but so that's where, for those reasons, I always believe you can be bolstering your team and you can be in playoff competitive windows every year between major league free agency, minor league free agency, good trades, and system development. But you have to have a payroll to support those things. And I'm not saying you have to have an elite payroll, but you at least got to be middle of the pack in order to operate in a way that keeps you in contention. We've talked about this before. Your margin for error is just razor thin when you're operating in the bottom third, bottom 5% of payrolls. So you have to, if you're not going to spend on major league payroll, you have to develop it from within. But that's hard. It's exceedingly difficult to develop your own homegrown core of players. Some teams do it, right? But you have to have invested in infrastructure. You have to have done a good job scouting. You have to have done an even better job in development. It's really hard to develop and then keep your own homegrown players for long extended windows of time. So if it's me, I'm always in a win now mode. If you were holding a major league franchise, you should always be doing things to win now. But I understand the need or the thinking to feel like you have to reset in order to really play with the big boys. Sometimes you get reminded of that. But it's tricky. I think that there are always, in every offseason, you see free agent signings that were below market value signings that provide above market value. So that means there are uncovered value or undervalued players scattered throughout free agency or trades that you make that, think people didn't see, at least at the time. And the teams that can see those things with good pro scouting, good amateur scouting, great player development can always move the needle. I contest that you need to be in losing windows all the time in order to then be good. I think that there's a prevailing thought that that's what needs to happen, but you can lose 100+ games and end up with the 7th, 8th overall draft pick. And so did the tank work really? And the lottery stuff kind of rules that out nowadays. So I think you can always be doing something to be competitive. But the teams that have those processes in place for a long time, they certainly have an advantage. And when you add money to that, they have a bigger advantage.
And really, we talked about this on a prior show, the number one overall pick. I mean, unless it's a Ken Griffey Jr. year, an A-Rod year, Bobby Witt, obviously he panned out, but it's not like the best players in baseball are those guys. I mean, you can go up and down the list. They're just, how many of those guys would you say are the absolute best players? You have the international market, which, there's ways to, not the richest teams are not the best teams in international necessarily. And then amateur side, we talk about Aaron Judge all the time. Aaron Judge was not a high pick. James Wood, who we're about to talk about here in a second, was not a particularly high pick. I mean, you can get freaks of nature Gunnar Henderson was a second-round pick, right? I mean, you can get these guys throughout the draft, even if they're first-rounders. You know, what was Pete Crow Armstrong, the 18th pick, and he was traded for a rental?
Yep.
So this is not the 2000s NBA. 'Cause even the NBA right now is not necessarily like that. NBA, you got guys getting, you know, the Shea Gilgeouses of the world. So I think the whole idea of tanking is outdated a little bit, at least in the current era of drafting, because you can get at the absolute highest level impact guys without having the number one pick. So what are you really getting?
I think this is a necessary correction to sports in general, but to baseball specifically. You got to give the league and the commissioner's office credit here to like implement things and aggressively implement things to shift that and to get teams out of that mode. Because I think it's bad for the regional fans. If that's the way your team is consistently operating, you'll lose a generation of fans by operating that way and like kind of always promising some 5-year in advance window to put up with the current status. So I think you're right. I think you have your finger right on it. I think that there isn't this direct correlation always between you got to be bad to then get the top draft pick to then be good. There's these elite level players. We talked about Skubal last time we were on here in the 9th round of a draft, and he's the best pitcher in baseball. And I think that's hard to do. Scouting is very, very difficult. I'll reiterate that at every point, but it's clearly doable. You can build your team from outside of those first 10 picks, right? I think basketball is a little harder. It's just smaller pool of players. Football even in the NFL, we see guys from all over the draft or even undrafted statuses going to impact the highest levels of the game. But I think we do see that a lot with baseball, especially the further along you go in the arc of a player. So like high school players and international guys who sign at 16 years old, 17 years old. We just don't have this process figured out to a science where we can say with conviction that these guys are going to be that. I think there's a reason you see guys like, we said we'll get into James Wood, but Aaron Judge kind of fall to this like range of players that you get passed on by all 30 teams in the first round and then only end up becoming the best player of your generation. I think it happens all the time, and I think it happens more in baseball.
Let's get into this player profile, because this is an interesting thing to me because, James Wood, when you look at him, right, and we could get into what he's doing here, pull up his baseball savant in a second. But when you look at James Wood, you say, if anyone ever looked like the number one overall pick, right, it is him. 6'7", 234, runs like the wind, obviously very coordinated, and everything looks good. But then you look at where he got drafted, 2nd round by the Padres. What a pick by them. Obviously becomes part of the Juan Soto trade. The rest is history. Now one of the best young players in baseball, putting up just unheard of numbers that we'll get to. But this type of player, we always talk about Aaron Judge, another one that was not that he looks like the number one overall pick. Obviously, he's performed like the number one overall pick. He was not the number one overall pick. These, let's call them supermen, right? These guys that they stand out physically. Giancarlo Stanton, another one, right? Was he a 2nd round pick when he got picked? So these guys that just, to the average person, will look at it and say, this is obviously the person you pick first, but that was not the case. There were reasons why they dropped. How do you go about evaluating the ultra physical, high upside product?
This one's tricky because I think that in order for a player to have upside, or for you to believe that a player has upside, he's got to show it. And baseball being such a physical game, I think one of the sturdier things you could ground yourself to is physicality. You need to be strong and physical to play this game. And so I think what's the best way to project that? A player that's presently physical or with signs of physicality coming, And so I think James Wood falls into that category. And I can pull up, if you watch his high school video, right? You'll just see like a long, lanky player. I think he was 6'7" at the time of the draft, right? Out of IMG. Like this to me as an evaluator is probably my favorite kind of player, because you don't have to like imagine some deep physical projection to reach for that player to reach, as opposed to a 6 foot, 150 pound player where you can dream on maybe gaining 20, 30 pounds. Like, no, you see that if this clicks, then the upside is there, right? Then you have the physicality to kind of back up the baseball skills. But, and it's a big but, big, tall players, especially position players, there isn't a great correlation between height, length of arms, and ability to stay inside the baseball as a hitter. It's just hard, right? Like there's more space for that player's arms to have to get inside the baseball. And a lot of guys, there's a lot of guys in that 6'4" plus range that you'll never hear about again, because it's just hard to hit as a big guy. It's harder to hit as a big guy. And you got to find these ways to do it. I think Judge has been able to do it. I think Giancarlo Stanton has been able to do it. Clearly James Wood has been able to do it. He's having a fantastic year. But I think that I understand why those guys slide in a draft, because the precedence for those extra large type of players to make it without an enormous amount of swing and miss attached to their game is there's just not a whole lot of it. I think there's more examples of guys not working out that you dreamt on because of the physical tool set than there are guys like Judge, Stanton, and, you know, hopefully Wood is in that category as well. But some guys do have it. And there's some between the ears components beyond the physicality, especially in the swing decision category. All three guys that I just mentioned make good swing decisions, in addition to having top of the scale power. But James Wood, I bet a lot of teams wish that they had that pick back. I think he goes the 62nd pick in the draft. So 61 players were selected ahead of him. Some teams selected 3 times before that and passed on him 3 times. But I'll bet it was for some swing and miss issues, right? As a high school player. The high school projection is deeper. Just got to imagine, further out. So shout out to the Padres, who have always been comfortable taking risks on upside high school players. They deserve credit for that identification. But then shout out to the Nationals for being stubborn on that being one of the pieces they would later demand for Juan Soto. But these don't always pan out this way. There's a lot of you can go down a long list of names of big physical players they didn't hit that upside. But it all comes down to risk tolerance. How much risk are you willing to take in a draft to select that? If James Wood gets selected as a top 10 pick in real time, it would be considered a high risk, deep projection pick. Now you scale, the way it's played out, it doesn't look that way, but at the time it would have looked that way. And I think would be the same. Judge was different because he was a college player, but if I'm talking to Stan Meek, former Marlins scouting director, on Giancarlo Stanton, there was probably some big risk associated to that player as well. And also those guys, you've mentioned this, those guys end up being multi-sport players, whether it be basketball or football. So their dedication to baseball might not happen until a later point in their career, therefore less polish. So when you're these sizes, you're probably playing football and basketball too, coming up. So I think that plays into it as well. Yeah. But that leads to athleticism as well. So,
and you're getting, if you're playing other sports, there's a scoreboard in everything you do, right? I mean, you're not just training, you're not just maybe doing tournaments that kind of get repetitive or showcases. I mean, you are there competing for your school, trying to win games and use different skills. With Stanton, I've watched his football highlights. I mean, he would have been, just knowing how those guys tend to project to college and the football side, he would have been on the path to being an NFL player just with how good he was at football. So he was in one. Kane's Cat Heat 305 makes a great point in the chat. He says, signability plays a big factor in the draft. So us talking about this guy going here, this guy going here, it's not necessarily one-to-one with
for sure
other sports, but it shows how you can kind of maneuver the system without tanking and having that low pick.
And a guy like James Wood would have been committed to a high-profile program. I'm not remembering exactly where. I'm sure it was some major, whether LSU or some big SEC program that he was committed to. So they'll throw out a big number, if you want to pick me at number 20, I'm sure the agents are throwing out a big number that might scare a team away. But I think in that draft, actually, I think San Diego takes Jackson Merrill with their first pick, which at the time, I remember being in that draft room and feeling like it was a bit of a random selection. Good on San Diego. They're 2 significantly impactful major league players with your first 2 or 3 selections in a draft can change the course of your organization. But because Jackson Merrill was lesser known, I'm pretty confident that they would have been able to shave, maybe pay him under slot where they selected him, to then have money left over to pay James Wood an above average. I think he got a $3+ million signing bonus. I might be getting that off, but he would have gotten a big signing bonus relative to where he got picked and where the slot was at that pick. So 100%, like the signability. I think somebody dropped in Mississippi State, and that makes sense.
Mississippi State. Yeah,
so that, and at that time, I think they were national champs in 2021. Mississippi State was, so would have been a big time SEC program. And so the player has the leverage of like, okay, if you don't select me here at this amount of money, then I'll just go to school and get my money later. And so, yeah, I'm glad that was brought up, because that signability definitely plays a role in that.
Just to your point, and we should talk about this draft from the Padres. It's like one of the great drafts of the last 10 years, at least, but then also one of the great trades on the national side. We'll talk about that trade one day, but you're right. So I have it pulled up here. So the 27th pick the Padres had, you had Chase Petty, who, has made it to the big league level, but has been ineffective. $2.5 million bonus at the 26th pick out of high school. 27th pick, Jackson Merrill, $1.8 million bonus, followed by Carson Williams, another high school player who has not made the majors yet, $2.3 million and 2.1. None of the guys have made the majors, by the way. 2.3 million, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.1, 2 million. This was a clearly under slot pickup to get Merrill by a good amount.
Well, you see it here.
He's the best player in the draft.
In the draft tracker, which I put up on the screen here, and let me make sure I'm sharing it. Yeah. So you take Jackson Merrill at 1.8, and he signs for $1.8 million, and the pick value is 2.57. But then your second selection, you pay $2.6 million, where the slot value is 1.1. So you see directly where they got the money to take the risk with James Wood at that point. And James, it doesn't mean that he was valued as the 62nd best pick, the 62nd best player. But at that point, he's probably sliding in the draft because he's throwing out a big number, a big signability number. But because they saved with their first pick as much as they did, they can go on and select James Wood and pay him a $2.6 million bonus. Now, if you look through the rest of the draft, they're probably going to have to be doing a lot of creative financials to then be able to, to select him at that value with their second pick. I'm actually seeing here they actually select Chase Burns with the 20th with their 20th round pick, who doesn't sign and goes on to be a top selection for the Reds quite a few years later. So yeah, the draft mechanics play a big role in this as well. So I'm glad we talked about that.
Well, look at this. They also, just to show you how good this draft was, and none of these guys play for the Padres, by the way. The next pick, Robert Gasser, they trade for Hader.
There you go.
So, this is a very, very, very franchise-altering draft, not only for the Padres, but for some other teams, particularly the Nationals. We'll get into all that in another show, because that was just a National League-altering trade, for obviously. Sure. Before we leave James Woods, just the numbers I wanted to make sure I got to. 96 batting run value, 78 base running run value. The fielding lags behind, but all the metrics: barrel 97, hard hit 99, average exit velo 95, bat speed, which, some of these great hitters don't have the bat speed necessarily. Yep. He's got that 95%, making good swing decisions, 78th percentile in chase. And then the walk rate, 22-year-old, 6'7", 235-pounder, 89% in terms of walk rate. So, percentile, I should say. So, before we leave Wood, when you are looking at guys that have some swing and miss, this rare physical profile, and you're saying he could, I've seen these guys fail, I've seen these guys succeed, I want him to have X and Y. Is it that swing decision, intangible work ethic, those two components? Because I know Judge, right? We've heard Dan Greenlee talk about he had the good swing decisions, he had the A+ makeup going in, the rest of it came together. Would those be two things? Say, okay, if you give me a guy with the physicality and the size and the athleticism, might have the swing and miss, but if he makes good the swing decisions, and I know he's going to work extra hard and do all the makeup stuff, A+, no worries. You feel better about that leap of faith?
I am. I think the swing and miss, like you have to keep it under a certain threshold. And usually that's a 26 to 28% at the big league level. You can keep that there. That's still striking out quite a bit, but just enough to not be detrimental to the lineup. But you mentioned the most important thing, which I'll say ad nauseum. The swing decisions you make allow you to access the power or not. And they allow you to, like, even if you're striking out at almost 30%, if you're getting on base at almost 40%, that usually means you're laying off pitchers' pitches. And I think, like, we keep deducing down to, like, how do you access your power? You capitalize on the pitch that you can really leverage. And pitchers are good, but they're not so good that they can pitch perfectly around your hot zone. They're going to come to you. Pitchers don't want to walk guys. They know what that means. They know that means traffic. They know, like, that's not a good recipe for success at the big league level, to not throw strikes. And so I think the way James Wood has been able to get past this swing and miss issue is making good swing decisions and getting on base. Because if they don't want to walk you, they can't always pitch around you. So they're going to challenge you, especially as a rookie, right? And so he's taken advantage of that. He's got to be one of the more feared hitters in all of baseball, because not only can he capitalize on your mistake, but he can make it look really bad. There's not too many things more demoralizing than a ball 450 feet opposite field, from a young player that that'll take a pitcher out of his groove completely. That'll demoralize a pitcher to give up a ball like the ones that he hits. If you look at the spray chart here, you look at where these balls land. I mean, this is on a 20 to 80 scale in terms of a power grade. This is 80 grade raw power and 80 grade game power right now. So top of the scale. Like anytime you're at the top of the scale in the power production department, you're in good territory. But if his on base wasn't where it is, he would not be as valuable of a player.
Right.
Because it would just be a two true outcome player, strikeout or homer. And that's a tough place to. There've been guys that live in that category, and you can only survive for so long. His ability to get on base and make good swing decisions accesses an elite level of player categorization for him.
Yeah, I don't know what his in zone miss rate was when he was coming out, but it's like just simple math. If you're not chasing pitches that you have a 0% chance of hitting, or a very low percent chance of hitting, even if your percentile in the zone is lower than you like, I mean, when he connects, it's explosive. So just that swing decision component makes you feel better about even real swing and miss issues, which obviously he's gotten past and has excelled. So interesting guy to watch. We talked a bit about the leverage, and this is a very big comment in the chat. Oh, look at that. Let there be light. Very big comment in the chat about the NIL affecting signability. Big discussion. A guy like James Wood, you mentioned the leverage he had. That leverage, to me, it seems like it's only increasing as the money increases on the college side. He goes to Mississippi State. He has a freshman season like some of these guys we've seen, Drew Burris, Daniel Cuvée, whoever.
Yep.
Now he's walking into that first overall spot or top 10 pretty fast, and he knows it, right? And he's still getting paid in college for those 2 years he has to wait, or 3 years he has to wait.
Yep.
How, as we sit here and watch regionals, love this product. I know you've really grown an appreciation, even as an international guy, someone who played college baseball, but maybe from a spectator standpoint and even a professional standpoint, you're getting more of an appreciation for that game and the talent there, the way it looks from an entertainment standpoint. How has NIL changed both the quality of product in college baseball and the way that college baseball interplays with the major league level?
I think it's fundamentally shifted it's fundamentally shifted baseball completely vertically as well, because it affects high school and it affects pro ball, right? So, but and I like it because it just, this is America, man. This is the dollar, we are very much a capitalist country, and college athletics have always seemed, from the outside looking in, exceptionally profitable. And I think we're seeing just how much with the connection of the NIL. So how does it actually practically affect, let's say, the professional game first, right? Traditionally speaking, there's been 2 cash out points for a player, right? Out of the draft, out of high school, or the draft out of college. But now, because colleges are able to offer legitimate NIL dollars to players to either stay in college for an additional season or sufficiently entice a high school player to go to college instead of cashing out at the high school point. Like we talked about with James Wood. I don't know how much NIL was a factor back in that time. I think 2021 feels like it wasn't quite as
not in baseball.
Right. Not in baseball, at least. So like maybe if there is NIL dollars, and I would imagine Mississippi State would have a healthy NIL budget at that point, winning national championships and stuff like that. They could entice James Wood to go and basically offer 2 cash out points, right? Like one in NIL dollars, where you'll get paid while you're in college, and then another cash out point where you get paid out of the draft. So to me, it's fundamentally affecting both college players graduating into professional baseball, as well as high school players taking NIL into consideration when they're deciding if they're going to like go and sign out of high school or go on to college where they'll still get NIL dollars. And then I think you're also seeing it with programs' ability, like those older players. I think NIL is rewarding a bit of an older player where the professional model rewards youth, right? So like you're opening up a capitalization point for a 22-year-old player, 23-year-old player that didn't exist before, right? Because there's a strong correlation with more seasoned players and wins at the college level. I think if you have a team full of 22, 23-year-olds versus a team full of 18, 19-year-olds, I'd bet on the group of 22, 23-year-olds in a college setting. Professional development arcs is a whole different story. But to win college baseball games, it allows perhaps the older, more seasoned player a space to keep playing baseball at the collegiate level without feeling like their professional chances are over if they're still playing college baseball at an elevated age. That was a thing, right? Like if you go into the draft as a 22, 23-year-old senior, you're not going to get rewarded for that on the draft side of things, but you might get rewarded for it on the NIL side. Therefore, you'll stay in college an extra year longer. So I think it's shifting on both sides of the baseball spectrum, if that makes sense.
Makes absolute sense. I'm pulling up an example here. You look at Caglione, who just got called up by the Royals, right? Superstar in college to the highest degree.
Yep.
Physical, had questions coming out. I would say, some similarities really, in my view, to a James Wood, right? Yep. If you just look at the body type and how they get down, some of the raw power, the way they look. You look at him coming out. He could have gone the James. I don't know what he was valued at coming out, but let's say he had a similar valuation to James Wood coming out. You're looking at a $2.6 million bonus. Caglione coming out of high school, going to college, you could see that guy making, I don't know, 300, 200,000 something, escalating numbers. But let's say it adds up to a total of $1 million in the college, 3 years, conservative. And he's probably going to be able to renegotiate and maybe get that number up. There's a lot of variability. Let's say he makes over $1 million in college. So now you've lost $1.6 million that you could have made in the minors playing college. Well, Caglione, when he got drafted, where he got drafted high because of his college production, he's looking at $7.5 million, right? So there's a $1.6 million gap between you made in college, which could have been your bonus, but you're making almost $5 million more in the draft. And Caglione's in the majors right now at the age of 22. We'll see how he performs. James Wood is 22. So they're the same age right now.
Right.
So Wood, look, turned out great for Wood.
Yep.
He flew through the minors. He's a star right now. But he could have gone on a very similar path and not hurt financially. Probably would have had a higher profile because who knows what kind of superstar this guy would have been in college. Maybe he goes number one and makes Travis Bazzana money, which is close to $9 million. And he's 22 years old in the majors, just like he is right now.
Yep.
So, it worked out perfectly for James Wood, but the Caglione path is just as viable.
Yeah.
It seems like,
if not more. Right. And I think what's important there is because this is all connected to economics as well, because there's the dollars involved that there is. I think college baseball has graduated from a development standpoint to being sometimes preferable to being in a professional minor league system. Sometimes the development you get at some of these big time programs is comparable, if not better, than some of these than playing in A ball and playing high A ball. Like you can, in Caglioni's case, University of Florida developed him to such an extent that he could enter the minor leagues at a high level without skipping too much of a beat. And I think that college baseball overall deserves credit for that. I think not only in the caliber of baseball that's being played, and you had an iron sharpening iron component to it, but also back to economics. You're seeing now college coaches being paid and compensated at a level that's above some like major league staff coaches. So like the incentive structure for colleges, it used to be that you graduated into professional baseball after X amount of time, proving yourself in college. Now you're seeing not an exodus, but you're seeing it work the other direction. You'll build up this professional career, and then you'll get recruited as a staff member by a college, top tier college program, right? And I think that makes sense. Like the incentives are there for college baseball to receive elite level coaching, development, strength and conditioning, mental skills, all these things. You're seeing a professionalization of college baseball programs at a level that can still allow integration into professional baseball at a high level, like with Caglioni being drafted, 2 years ago now, and now being ready to jump right in.
Last year,
not even.
He was still in college this time last year.
There you go. So I think college baseball is having a moment. We talked about this last year as well. I think the wide regionals now, it's just a fun brand of baseball to watch with like professional level upside as well. And I think it's just as viable to go to college, make some money, and then still be selected high if you do and perform in college.
And look, there's an intangible aspect to this. So Wood has same age, roughly 138 games at the major league level. So he has that head start on Caglioni that I'm sure that was a hell of a lot of fun to be major leaguer at that age. But before that, talking about Complex, then Lake Eisnor, Fredericksburg, Harrisburg, Wilmington, Rochester, and all respect to those places. But man, it must have been a lot of fun being Caglioni in the ACC, packed house, all the girls, just a different lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
TV. I mean, I knew my son, who's a baseball fan, knew who Caglioni was just from watching him on TV before he got even drafted. Whereas Wood, you maybe saw him on a prospect list or something, but it wasn't like he was like a star until he really started doing what he's doing. This guy came as a star coming in. So, there's intangible stuff to the decision as well.
For sure. I think we're not seeing the same level of rushing to professional baseball because people, they maybe associate professional baseball with Major League Baseball and forget that the minor league journey is not for the faint of heart. You're going to these towns and to these places where they're not the flashy, sexy towns, and you're not living the lifestyle in these A-ball, AA, even AAA towns that you would be living at the University of Florida or at the University of Arkansas, where those experiences are, like people talk about those SEC schools and the lifestyle that you live, the experience there as some of the best times of their life. So you juxtapose that with being in the middle of nowhere, playing A-ball on a minor league salary. Even if you got a good bonus, it's still minor league baseball. A lot of pro teams won't want me saying this, but minor league baseball is a grind, man. No matter how you dress it up, and it's gotten a lot better than it used to be. They're compensated better than they used to be, but it's still like putting that next to an SEC, ACC experience. It's kind of not an easy decision, but I think I'd pick the college route if it's me and I'm that talented. Now everybody's situation is different. Some kids just like, no, I'm a big league baseball player and I want to get there as fast as I can. And if you have that level of confidence, my hat's off to you. But I think it's also just as viable to feel like, oh, I want to go to this college program, have the college experience, and get developed at a high enough clip to be a high pick. Two viable means of getting there, but I think it benefits college baseball right now.
Robert Perez in the comments had a great question. Obviously, I'm wearing the Canes shirt. I'm a fan of the Canes, as are some of the folks in the chat. Daniel Cuvée, right? You look at him as an example. Not that much different than some of the guys we're talking about. Big, physical on the right-hand side. But he ultimately he had a chance to go pro out of high school, goes to college. Freshman sensation. And then as a sophomore, not only does he repeat a lot of his stats, his strikeout percentage goes down considerably now in 19%, which, from what I understand, 20%, you get on for college evaluation purposes, you get on the other side of that as a power hitter like Cuvée. That's a significant development point for him. So without getting into specifics of his financial situation or whatever coming out, and to answer your question, Robert, he can't get drafted until next year. So let's 26 draft candidate. If he continues on that trajectory, that strikeout percentage keeps going lower, which, by the way, Caglione is another one who his strikeout rate dropped in college to a microscopic percentile before he got picked. I mean, can't say he's not developing on top of being a star and having all the fun that he's having and having the success where he's going to be, I think, in a position to make more money wearing these colors, getting drafted, as opposed to as a hotshot high school prospect with some swing and miss concerns.
Yeah, I think what the most important thing there is like a developmental arc. Not every kid's ready at 18 years old to showcase who he is. You need that year 18, year 19, year 20, to develop into the player that you are. Not everybody's ready to showcase that at 18, 19. James Wood was, right? He showcased enough at that point to be able to capitalize on his value. I can't speak to Caglione, for example, because I don't remember him as a high school player, but I'm sure he was pretty good, but maybe not at that. Right? So every player situation is, independent of every other situation, and the context matters. And I didn't see Cuvée as a high school player, so I can't really speak to why he's more appealing as a draft prospect now than he was then. But yeah, Cuvée is an example of a player that's benefiting from having gone to college and being able to showcase who he is at the collegiate level. And he's one of my favorite college players to watch right now.
And they get the opportunity to go to the Cape, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that come into the picture that just help them from forget the fun of it, the pro aspect of it as well, just becoming a better pro prospect. K's Cat Heath 305 in the comments has a question relating to Caglione, which is, why did the Royals call him up at this time? David Sampson, former Marlins president. I won't have you bash him, but I will. I mean, disaster for this community. Said that if they did, they would lose a year of service time with him by calling him up. What are your thoughts on that decision from the Royals to say, hey, man, we got a superstar. Maybe we got another superstar. Let's just, why waste time? Let's have some fun.
I am not a believer in firing a whole lot of bullets in AAA if the player's ready, or in AA if the player's ready. If your internal assessments and your internal evaluations tell you like this is going to play right now, and the Royals are in a window where they're good now, or they're at least, competitive now. And if you feel like instead of going out and like trading for some piece that might provide what he's doing, if you have an internal option that's doing it, the service time argument is really like, do I get an extra year tacked on to the back of these 6 years that I have him for under control? So it's not really it doesn't really affect you right now. But if this player you really believe he's going to help you win, and you actually do win, the dollars you generate and the revenue that come from those wins or that playoff run or that World Series run far, in my opinion, outweighs his Super 2 status that he might reach a little earlier. Super 2 status is basically a player that reaches arbitration a year earlier because his service clock started earlier, which is what teams with a low budget are trying to avoid. It's an extra year of paying the player, and it sets the floor of what he gets paid every year in arbitration. Basically makes it more expensive. I think if you're good, you should get paid in the major leagues. And if you're good and ready to play in the major leagues, I don't believe in artificial suppression of a player. It's not a popular take amongst front offices, but I think teams are punting on that more than I've ever seen. Service time manipulation used to be a thing a lot more than I feel it is now, because we're looking at players' primes differently. I think we're appropriately adjusting to the fact that a player's prime can be 22, 23, 24, instead of trying to time it up so that you get him in his 27, 26, 27, 28 years. I think we're seeing that you get them in your 22, 23, 24, those seasons can be just as productive, if not more, and if not healthier, because they're just more youthful, exuberant players, right? Exactly. So I think this is an internal assessment that he can really help them right now. And I think it's the correct one if you're asking me.
Yeah, so Kane's kind of pulled it up. So if you look at the Kansas City Royals right now with some really talented veteran arms, 3.13 team ERA. That's fourth in the entire major leagues. Look at their offense. They are 20. Where are they here in total runs? They are 28th in total runs, just above the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Colorado Rockies, right behind the Chicago White Sox. Not where you want to be.
No.
So to your point, I mean, not only do you have Caglione potentially having prime years, I mean, you have Bobby Witt having prime years. So if you need offense and you got a guy in the minor leagues that is absolutely dominating, and beyond just that, again, I'm from the fan side of things. I'm not an executive. I'm just coming from a fan perspective. Man, Kansas City had their moment, right, with the championship team, kind of unique team, defense, bullpen, whatever. But like, if the Kansas City Royals can have a team like the Phillies are now, or the Astros have been, with just like superstar players that are a blast to watch, and everybody in the city and everybody in the country has their jersey on. I mean, there's like, can you put a price tag on that if you're a franchise like the Royals?
No, and I think if you're competitive with a bottom of the league offense, and you have a prospect, an offensive minded prospect that can provide power and an injection of, and sometimes like an injection of youthful exuberance into your lineup can really push you into a postseason. You mentioned Dontrelle Willis earlier in the what that meant to that 2003 run. Sometimes like youth can just kind of energize your club.
Well, who did they put
overall.
on the offensive side to get that going?
Miguel Cabrera, right? And so these things, they can really, if you made service time arguments during that time, like you don't get that injection, right? So like right now, the Royals need it. He can provide it, and you're either going to have to trade for it closer to the deadline, and that's going to cost you something. And the correlation of trading for a player, like it can go poorly as often as it goes well. That's a whole other scouting assessment. But if you feel you have something internal, in-house, and it's an offensive upgrade when you're starving for offense, this one to me is, you worry about the service time issues later. You worry about paying him later. And again, the revenue you generate by making the postseason is going to like make that maybe not a complete wash, but close to it. And like you give the indication to your fans that you're in it, as opposed to having a high-performing player stashed away in AAA that, now you have to have playing time for this player. You can't, I doubt that the Royals are doing this to like have him be some supplemental piece on the bench.
Right.
That guy's got to play, and he's got to see at bats every day. I'm assuming that they have that. It looks like they do have that for him. So good on the Royals for doing this.
Yeah, and an exciting team immediately. I mean, they were already pretty exciting. We've talked about them. But, man, I mean, if you can get those two guys going at the same time, I mean, they could be – you talked about the Orioles, right? They were kind of trending towards being that team, having a hiccup this year. Obviously, they got time to get it right. But now the Kansas City Royals jump right into that mix.
For sure.
If this guy is what we think he could be, and, I mean, I know you haven't done a full deep dive on Caglione. We will dive into him, especially now that you get some major league at bats, because he's such an interesting player. But we just talked about James Wood. From what you know about Caglione and seeing him, I know you saw him up close last year. I saw him for a UM game standing right in front of him, and you couldn't picture him more. Aside from Ohtani and James Wood, two guys I saw up close here when they came to play the Marlins, I haven't seen a physical specimen like this guy that's also an effective player. I mean, just from the way they run, the way they move. Those are the three that kind of I put in that same category, just from a fan, just looking at them perspective. Can he be that type of player? Forget the pitching part, which he's left behind. He's not going to be that part of the. But Ohtani is a hitter. James Wood is a hitter. The fact they can both run. Can you see him at least being in that universe with the tools he has? Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous ceiling with a high floor already. So it's like I can't really put a ceiling on him yet. I get a lot of I get more explosive Matt Olson vibes even from Jack Caglione. Like it just like a even more like twitchy and explosive, but a big physical left-handed stick at the first base position that can play defense really well. I think the pitcher stuff we're not going to see as a pro, but it speaks to the athleticism of the player because he was lights out as a pitcher as well. Oh yeah, some people thought he might go that route. Right, and I think he could if he wanted to. I think if he's showing this kind of offensive promise, I'd rather that affect me every day than once every 5 days. But that's a
that's an argument for another day. But I think I see a lot of Matt Olson here. I see, I'm trying to think of other guys that I can put like even like in Freddie Freeman territory. This working out fantastically for them, but controlling the strikeouts, hitting for power as a left-handed hitter, and providing first base defense, I think, good for the Royals here.
And look, I think back to that. By the way, what a draft of college players, right? That year that he came out. The fact that this guy he didn't go number one speaks to the depth of that college position player draft. But someone else, Nick Kurtz, we talked about him on one of the prior episodes of this show, right? First baseman, maybe not as athletic, but there's some similarities there. Gets called up early, was killing the minors, nothing left to do. We talked about the adjustment that he had, AAA to majors. You've said the difference has never been bigger, right?
Huge gap.
AAA, just with the scouting reports, we talked about it in a prior episode, but the scouting reports, everything else, big difference. Nick Kurtz kills the minors to a degree, that was unheard of. Start the year, gets called up to the majors in April. 24 at bats, 490 OPS. Saw him in person, he was flailing a little bit. Move on to May, got that out of his system. 852 OPS. The on base jumps from 240 to 337. The slug jumps from 250 to 514. I know it's a small sample size, only 24 at bats in April, but is there something to, hey, let him work through his problems at the major league level? So not only do we get him in the postseason, but we're not seeing that later on in the year. He's getting it out of his system now. And then by the time the postseason comes around, forget the service time, he's ready to rock and help us.
This is one of the hardest things in all of baseball evaluations is to really quantify the gap between AAA and the big leagues. Like, what is going to happen when the third deck comes into play, when the lights get brighter, when the stuff gets better, when the advance report is out on you every day, when it becomes somebody else's job just to get you out. Like, think about that. A pitching coach or an assistant pitching coach's job is, okay, rookie, welcome to the big leagues. Here's what I think your holes are. We're going to hit all of them. Maybe we'll give you the benefit of the doubt with a few fastballs early on, but if we see a hole, we're just going to expose that. And major league pitchers can expose that. And I think not every guy should be expected to splash onto the scene as a major leaguer because of what I just mentioned. There are processes in place just to make sure that it doesn't go well for you. Now, guys that make good swing decisions are in a better position because they won't chase pitchers' pitches. But I think here's where I think covering the fastball. If you can cover the fastball, you're not getting beat by high-velocity fastballs, you have a better chance of sustained success at the big league level. But no two guys are the same. No two guys' path is the same. There's inexplicable reasons why a guy doesn't have success right away. Guy could be having things going on off the field that we don't know about. Guy could be in matchups that are just not favorable to him in that moment, or that lineup is not conducive to you getting too many pitches to hit in that moment. So I wish I had an answer to it. He did this in AAA, therefore it's going to go this way for him in the big leagues. There's just something intangible that happens in that jump from AAA to the big leagues that some guys, it goes well for some guys, it doesn't go well for other guys. But just because it doesn't go well at the outset doesn't mean it's ultimately not going to go well for them, period. And I think it takes a certain level of discipline for teams to stick with guys that maybe don't have that initial success when they get there, and then identifying what they need to do in their return to the minor leagues if they get optioned, to get them back at a place where they will be ready for major league sustained success.
Look, shout out to Nick Kurtz for figuring it out. At least it seems like he might be figuring it out. Oakland A's, talk about the Royals. The A's are kind of a mirror image, right?
Yep.
You have the shortstop that's electrifying, one of the best players in the league, at least right now.
One of the best rookies for sure. Big
first baseman, power from that left side, hit it to the moon. College guy, probably up to stock in college. So, two teams that, two of my favorite jerseys, by the way, and just in baseball, period, A's and Royals. I mean, can't get any better than that for my money. But two franchises that have been, a little light lately and are really starting to find where they can be effective. And it's going to be exciting to watch those franchises and those shortstops and first basemen, man, with Kurtz and Wilson and Witt and now Caglione, man. A lot of young talent coming through college, man. It's fun to watch.
It's good for the game.
Yeah, it's good for the game. And still high school hitters. That's another episode too, because Bobby Witt on the high school side, the high school college hitter debate, It's going to be raging here in this draft. So stay tuned to Bill Bigley Show. We're going to have a lot of draft stuff because there's a lot to get to. Is this a trend with college hitters? I'm starting to see a little bit of a pushback, and the high school hitters kind of come up when you see the success of the Bobby Woods of the world, the James Woods of the world. So a lot to chew on. But
the number one overall pick is probably going to be a high school player, position player.
I heard it might be the top 3 guys,
right,
between the pitcher and then.
I think it'll be ultimate cat and mouse. Like, I think you'll always think that, okay, maybe now the trend is to go down the college path, and then a Bobby Witt will show up, or an Ethan Holiday will show up, and then it'll rearrange the way you think about it, and it's cat and mouse.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. We'll talk about all that. By the way, appreciate the chat. Rob Perez, Canes Cat Heat, Cuban Oric, all these guys making it happen there.
I think Robert Perez might be our intern Micaela's dad, if I'm
really?
If I'm
Well,
not mistaken. So shout out to
Robert.
Oh, JC's dad. Wow.
Big
Amazing.
Rob. Big shout out to Big Rob, man. So before we wrap it up, we like to talk about the whole world of baseball, not just the minors, not just the majors, not just the college side of things, but the MPB, KBO. We like to cover all of it. And I know there is a swing and quite frankly, production level that's got your attention out east. Teruaki Sato, 202 WRC plus. Next highest is 184. So you see the results on paper, but man, it just looks good.
We've been talking about him quite a while. I've been wanting to find a way to get him into every episode, just because I think, the Japanese cargo stands out. Just a super pretty, stylistic, sexy left-handed swing. But I've also been watching him make some plays at third base that have been sick as well. I'm going to put him on the stage here just because here he is hitting a home run off Blake Snell. But
wow.
I want this to be a global baseball show, right? And I think Teruaki Sato, I don't know where he is in terms of his eligibility to come to the major leagues, but I think we've talked about Seiya Suzuki. I think he was leading in RBIs not too long ago. Obviously Shohei Ohtani. But I think the Japanese position players, I think we're going to be seeing more of them overall. I think we'll see him in the WBC featured prominently. But it's just a pretty swing, and he's having a monster year in the MPB. And I want this show to be able to recognize those players as well. And so shout out to Teruaki Sato, the Hanshin Tigers.
Obviously Blake Snell, right? So he's turned on that one. The elements of a swing that you think can translate from east to west. Now, look, people thought Ichiro's swing wasn't going to translate. Obviously, that did. Shohei Ohtani, remember when he was in the spring training, some of the comments about just mechanically what needed to change, and he did make some adjustments. But just from a scouting perspective, maybe just looking at someone's twitch, what are some of the things that you say, okay, this swing has a better chance to translate to this side of the world than maybe some other swings that are successful in that style of baseball, in that league, but not quite translatable?
I think in this case, there's a good move to the baseball, a short, quick move to the baseball, always. That's a pretty universal standard. East, west, wherever you're playing, a short, quick move to the baseball, which I think this guy has, is always preferred. But I think here there's a lift to this swing, an appropriate lift, not just lift for the sake of lifting, but there's an appropriate lift to the pull side and a path that's conducive to extra base production in the air, where I think some Asian style or some Japanese style swings can be more, put the ball in play, put the ball on the ground, slap type, especially from the left side. You'll see a lot of drift into the first base side. And I think, Sato is able to control that a little bit for lift power to the pull side, and plays a third base position. So he's kind of in a good, he profiles well. So I think this plays, but I think the ability to lift the ball for power while not striking out a whole lot is probably the most transferable skill set.
And do you see an increasing volume? And we see the players, but going forward, do you think there's going to be an increasing volume of Japanese position players? Because it feels like it's like, here's one guy, and they're impact guys, but it's just, it's one-offs where you can see maybe a path that you say, all right, there's going to be 4 of these guys this year, or 3 of these guys. This is just the class of guys that are eligible, and they're going to be going on their way. Do you see it going in that direction?
Yes. I think the economics dictate that, you see Shohei Ohtani sign for what he signs for. You'll see Seiya Suzuki having some success on the right side of the plate, whereas, Otani's a lefty. I think economics, man, you'll see dollars there and you can change the trajectory of your family. And therefore those processes of not swing changes, but just developing your swing to still hit for power starts to happen at younger levels in Japanese baseball. Now that's harder because I think the overall philosophy is counter to lifting the ball in the air to the pull side. So they'll have to fight these developmental battles earlier on. And Japanese baseball, while it's evolving, I think it's still not stuck, but it's still in a more traditional than in this, what you would call a launch era revolution that we're in full blast here in the States. So I think we're seeing that slower trickle, but I think it's headed exactly where you're saying, where there'll be these classes of players, 3-4 at a time on the position player side, that we'll see that are impacting the major leagues with extra base hits and home run power.
Looking forward to seeing it. We'll be covering it here on El Big League Show live. Tune in, like, subscribe, share this show, tell your friends. We'll be going live every single week and covering all kinds of topics. If you have any topics you want us to cover, hit us up in the comments. Chat was bumping today. Appreciate everybody joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, baby Junior.